plan for social mobility. I mean, that's not what you want to hear if you're a Labour Prime Minister, right?
No, this is sort of one of the big sort of overarching ideas that any Labour government should really have. And Keir Starmer has come under fire this morning from the Social Mobility Commissioner, saying that there's no coherent strategy. There's lots of ideas of getting the youth back into work, economic growth, educational standards, trying to get them up. But actually, how do you bring them all together? Now, he sort of says there has been some improvements in places like Edinburgh, Newcastle, Bristol, but there's been sort of an over-concentration there, and it's not really improving things in those industrial heartlands, those sort of red wall areas where the Labour government really needs to sort of try and hone in on. So I think Keir Starmer reading this, actually bring all those strands together and actually try and sort of reduce things like youth unemployment, actually even try and improve people's life chances.
I was really struck with this. This is Alan Francis, the Commissioner. He said that the government talks a lot about social mobility, often about the social mobility of themselves or their colleagues. I mean, that is a bit of a burn, isn't it? It says, like, they're talking about what great examples they are of social mobility, but not actually necessarily doing much for others.
It's absolutely true. And just a few days ago, Rachel Reeves actually gave this interview, which I thought was so interesting in kind of being emblematic of this problem. She was basically saying that, you know, when she was in her mid-20s, she was able to buy her first flat, but she recognises very clearly that people now are not able to do that. And I think that raised a lot of questions of, OK, we're recognising that there's an issue, we're recognising there's a shift, and you are the people that actually are the only people who have the power to change that. But it doesn't, as Alan Francis is saying, it doesn't really feel like there is a coherent plan. We hear stuff about, you know, free school meals. Obviously, all of these small things are fantastic. And, you know, if that gives a child from a poorer background a better chance at doing well at school, that's great. But beyond that, it doesn't feel like there is a plan to actually help people kind of break free from the shackles, I suppose, of how much their parents earn when they're children, and that's a problem.
We've also picked up the story on the front page of the Daily Telegraph as well. So this is all part of the government's strategy to tackle animal welfare, right?
Mm-hmm. It is. So this is part of a broader animal welfare strategy. Of course, most of the paper's picking up on the trail hunting, but there's other things in there as well. They're banning puppy farming. Of course, that was a huge issue that grew loads during the COVID period when everyone wanted a dog and everyone was at home, and including things as well, like potentially banning the use of cages for chickens and crates for pigs in farming practices as well. But clearly the Telegraph here, on brand, going for the trail hunting. Of course, fox hunting was banned in 2004, and since then you've basically been allowed to use the smell of fox urine to effectively carry on doing the hunt without allegedly killing the foxes. Although since the ban, there have been so many cases where people in the countryside have been found to be trail hunting, inverted commas, but because the scent is there, the dogs are still managing to find the live foxes and they're being killed anyway. So this is basically Labour trying to tackle this. Of course, people mainly towards the right, we're hearing from Conservatives and, of course, Nigel Farage, who says this is a war on the countryside. He says that this is what Labour's big plan is. They don't want countryside traditions. But I think kind of the counter-argument to that is really clear. I mean, if your tradition involves going to kill things on Boxing Day, I mean, can we not find a new one? It does feel quite outdated. No one's saying that you can't ride your horse around, put your outfit on, take your dogs out, that's all fine. But, you know, it's pretty barbaric, I think.
What's your view on this? Because I guess there'd be some people who would say that, look, we're a nation of animal lovers and actually all of the stuff at animal welfare goes down really, really well with the public. We want to make sure that we're treating our animals fairly. And then I guess there's the other argument that is that Labour is at risk of seeming anti-farmer.
Yeah,
not
I think
with the trail hunting necessarily, but more generally.
Yeah, I think there's a big. This is seen as a sort of maybe an attack on rural life, really. Whether you look at this, the farmers' tax has been obviously big in the news for the past several months or so, and I think it's just one thing after another. And you've got campaigners like the Countryside Alliance talking out against this. So I think Labour had they seem to have worked their way into sort of many sort of countryside areas, and I think it feels like that sort of has hit a bit of a roadblock, and just that there'll just be a rowback from that.
We've also got this interview by Wes Streeting. I have to say, my eyebrows raised when I saw this. Is it an Observer interview? But the fact that they're picking up in the Times the next day probably, I guess, shows how significant it actually is.
Yeah, there was an interesting line in that Observer interview yesterday where he said that he didn't want to sort of give rise to talking about the leadership campaign, so wasn't going to answer that. The fact,
I know, yeah.
the fact that he's actually giving the interview, and it feels like he's done several interviews over recent weeks. Now he is health secretary and he has to do some, but I think one of the key things here that he's talking about Britain rejoining the customs union, which is going to play totally to those Labour supporters, and this idea is backed by 80% of Labour voters, and I think there's a fair chunk, 39% of those who voted Tory actually back rejoining the customs union. I think it's more the fact that there could be a customs union, not the customs union, so I think there may be a bit of a get out for him. But I think as we move, you know, Keir Starmer's been under so much pressure in recent weeks and months. I think this just adds fuel to the fire. Wes Streeting, whether it's Andy Burnham, whether it's Angela Rayner, Keir Starmer's just got to look over his shoulder every turn. I
mean, it's on, isn't it? Look, Wes Streeting is talking about, like, you know, customs unions. He's talking about whether or not we should ban phones for under 16s. Angela Rayner's got a book out. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't envy Keir Starmer right now. It's not exactly the festive cheer I think you'd hope for if you were Prime Minister. I feel like everyone's kind of at your heels. But look, I think this customs union thing is really interesting because just a week ago or so, or maybe two, we were hearing that we're rejoining the Erasmus scheme. That's that youth mobility scheme that allows young people to go basically on an exchange in Europe and go and live for a fixed period of time. So it seems as if there has been a shift in the government's approach to talking about Brexit. I mean, for a while it was this toxic word. And I have noticed that even here, they don't actually mention Brexit. It's really interesting. They're trying to kind of circumnavigate it without using the so-called toxic word that they think the voters really just don't want to hear anymore. But I think there's so much focus on what we want to do as a nation. This isn't unpopular. Leaving the customs union, economists evaluate, was a bad thing overall for our economy. But I think there's not enough focus on whether Europe want us. I mean, that's a huge part of it. This was such a protracted affair. It took up so much political bandwidth for them. Why on earth would they just welcome us back with open arms? And I think we can get very caught up in whether Brits want to do something, but actually, will it be accepted?
And what is the deal that what they ask here for in response? It's like that with Erasmus, right? You know, it did cost like quite a chunk of money to rejoin that scheme, right? And customs union, you can imagine that there could be a few strings attached to that as well. Next up, we're looking at the Sun, right? Ryan, what we've got?
Yeah, so this is Princess Beatrice, who has decided to shy away from any sort of royal involvement, UK involvement this winter. She's just decided to go away, go skiing. Now, the royals traditionally, Beatrice, you know, due to her seniority, will get invited to Sandringham. She said she's not actually going to do that. And not only that, she's not going to be spending any time with her dad, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, or her mum. So she's just decided to head for the slopes and get away from it. You just feel like it's just been far too much for someone like, you know, you look at Princess Beatrice, Princess Eugenie, they're caught on the periphery of all the, you know, the Epstein sort of investigation, and it can't be particularly pleasant. You saw that there's that picture of them, you know, hugging in the street just a few weeks ago. It probably just takes their strain, and it probably is a good thing for them just to escape the country.
Yeah, it must be awful. I mean, it must be awful. Like, you have a lot of sympathy, definitely. Although I guess going skiing, you know, could be worse.
I was going to say, all right for some. Yeah, exactly.
Wouldn't mind that completely. I think this is actually really, really interesting. So this is the shoplifting story in the Daily Telegraph, and the headline there, shoplifters get away with stealing every minute. And there has been, it is clear to see, a really significant increase in shoplifting, right?
There has, and this is analysis of new police data that's been released, and that is a shocking statistic. I mean, 1 every minute is, when you think about just how crazy that is, it's a lot, and it has risen so sharply. And I think there's so many factors as to why this is. One, the cost of living, it is just not going down. It's only getting worse for people. And of course, that feeds into this. But I think as well, there just hasn't been enough really to address the kind of not shame, shame's a bad use of word, but I feel like for a while it was kind of seen as an embarrassing thing to do, whereas now it's quite normalised, and I think that makes people think it's not as bad of a crime as maybe they used to. But what's interesting is that violent crime actually has gone down over the past 20 years, so that's really serious things, it's murder, it's all of the things like that. But what has increased is things like phone snatching, shoplifting, and that's what feeds into this public perception that crime is up, because those are all the visible things that you can see on your doorstep. You go to a supermarket, it. You see everything locked up in those cages with the security tags on. And it feeds into this feeling of kind of societal disorder that I think makes people feel really miserable about the kind of state of affairs in the UK.
I think that's really a good point, actually, about the visible crime that you see if you see someone jumping the barriers when you get on the train, or, like you say, if you go to your local supermarket and you see someone putting something in a bag. This next story I actually love. So this is The Times. And it's good news if you were rubbish at stuff at school, I think, right? Kind of.
Yeah, I think if you've not got your A-levels, particularly good A-levels or GCSEs, there is still hope. And it says here that Albert Einstein, for instance, did not stand out from other high-performing students of his age. So there is hope for everyone. But it does show that there is hope for everybody, and you don't actually have to do that well to at a really young age to actually get to your 20s, get into your 30s, and you can really excel in all sorts of things.
I love this. I think that the message in it is also great because it kind of takes away from that kind of tiger parenting where you've got to, if you want your kids to be good at something, then they've got to do like 10 million hours of like netball practice or whatever it is. Actually, the best thing you can do is to instill a sense of kind of curiosity and like a love of sort of learning in the world more generally, which I think is actually, I don't know, feels quite nice.
I think you just let them follow their own passions and,
exactly.
Let them do their reading, let them attend the after-school clubs that they want to attend rather than you must do this, and you must go to, be the best performing art student or drama student. Just let them do, let them flourish in their own way.
And do you know what? I think there is something really important about failing when you're young as well. And I think that's probably what feeds into this as well, is those children who never, ever step a foot wrong. They've never known what it's like to be bad at something, to try something and be bad. Either that's because of parental pressure or they're just, pretty gifted children. But then, of course, inevitably, you are going to fail at something. I hate to break it to people. There might be a time in your 20s or your 30s. And that will probably hit a lot harder than it would if you're, if you're under 10 and you're just trying things out. So definitely not a bad thing.
We haven't got long left, but just finally, look at this one in the mail. Call me Scrooge, but I never buy my kids any Christmas presents, and I know they're happier as a result. I'd like to ask the kids. I bet they wouldn't say the same thing.
This is obviously a very extreme case. This is someone basically saying they don't want to buy into the consumerism of Christmas. It all ends up in landfill. What's the point? This is extreme, but I think, there are people who get into debt over Christmas for feeling this pressure that you have to spend so much money on gifts. And I think that's an important point to make. You don't necessarily have to go quite this extreme, I think, but it's good to be mindful nonetheless.
It's true. I mean, it has rampant consumerism, I think, is definitely out of control. It's been really fun to chat. Thanks very much for being in, both of you. Coming up, we are going to be looking at the new figures on the state of the economy. That is coming up in just a few moments' time.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist